The writing process for me, I think, means a space that I need to get into. I need to create a container for myself to shift my mindset so that I can get into creative mode, because I think most of the time, most of us are running around our analytical brain just getting the administrative details of life done.
Okay, so I think any process, the writing process not being much different, is a combination of the overall arc, so the process of starting with the first word on the first page on the first day and ending with a finished product that you're taking to market, that you're signing in chapters. But part of that process is composed of day to day.
It's more than just, creating an outline or something you've learned in university and writing essays, and it's what brings you to life to get that spark you want.
Having a writing process begins when I really think about where I want the story to go, when the story comes to me, at least in its major points, and then I think about that in enough detail to have an outline and sit my butt in my chair long enough to get it written, to go from outline point to outline point.
The writing process doesn't mean much, really. I never think about writing as a writing process. I think about the task at hand and the best way of tackling it.
When I think about my writing process, or how I go about my writing process, the first thing for me is it's always been evolving. I think every writer has their own process, and when you're first starting, I was really interested in asking other writers, how do you do this, and what's your process? And I tried out a little bit of everything.
Actually, I've learned a lot from other writers, and probably in the last year I've totally refined my process. Now I start with character, and then I do setting, and then the plot evolves out of that. I used to start with plot, but ultimately in a book the character is the most important part, so I've decided that's where I have to put my focus first.
Flaubert said the writer has to be like God, everywhere and nowhere. What I take he meant is that when you write, you have authoritatively to create a totally new world. And all the characters, they're like puppets in a way.
The daily process is I wake up and I'm so excited in the morning to hit my manuscript. So the first thing I try to do is just get some coffee and get to the computer, because that's when my mind is the freshest. That's when I'm excited to see the characters, find out what they've been doing overnight.
Our challenge is to find out what that is. What is our process?
So I have to do a ritual to shift my mindset, and create a physical environment. So I have to create an inner environment and a physical environment to do that.
You have to be in charge. On the other hand, it has to be hidden. Nobody should see the underside of it, what you're doing to create this cohesive world. So that's the writing process. How it happens is a mystery.
I'm sometimes asked if I had a plan, or how did I want to approach my very first book. I didn't have a plan other than I wanted to write an entire book. I wasn't sure I could do it. I didn't know if I could sustain a story for 300, 400 pages. So my big plan was to actually do word by word, page by page, until I could get to a completed manuscript. And it was a bad manuscript.
There wasn't a plan. I was living in Korea. I was studying martial arts. I had a lot of free time on my hand. I had the old 512K Mac, the first Mac computer. And I just started writing a book. I never even thought about getting published. I wrote 2 complete manuscripts, and then someone read it and said, hey, this is like a real book. And then I started thinking, well, gee, maybe I should do something with it. But I don't know, I just fell into it. I think I'd read so much, I didn't really have anything to read, so I decided to write my own book.
Eventually, my style is I have to go somewhere. I had to go to the Gulf Islands, or I went to India, and I just had a schedule every day where I really didn't have anything else going on, because I needed to immerse myself in the characters or immerse myself in the topic and not have anything else I had to be dealing with. Because then I could go to a depth that I couldn't go to when I'm writing in the city and trying to make a living at the same time.
The first book was a collection of short stories, and short stories accumulated over the period of years. So it was a slow process. Each story takes a long time to develop. And I didn't particularly had a plan, okay, now I have 6 or 10 stories, I'm going to look for a publisher, editor, whatever. I was just laboriously working on the stories. And then the moment came when I said to myself, okay, well, maybe that's enough, let's try. And then I was very discouraged because I get about 20, which is not a lot, no, and I went to Seattle to the writers' conference and couldn't even get an interview. So I said to myself, okay, all I want to do is to write, so I should proceed. And then I kept writing. And I had a trust in fate somehow. I knew somehow that the circumstance will cling. If my writing is good, it will be known. I had that faith. So I put probably less efforts into looking for an agent, for a publisher, than is normally assumed. By my books, it was a lot of effort. I'd rather write any moment I spend on looking and going to conferences, but still probably it wasn't as huge. Because every time I didn't have a success, I said to myself, okay, I'll go back to writing. Something will happen, and something did. A small publisher in BC noticed my book. I sent my book. He loved it. He published it. And we went from there.
As far as having a plan for the first book, I had really spent a lot of time thinking through where I wanted the story to go, where I saw the characters going, and just wanted to share the story that I had come up with other people who might be interested in the same sort of things. So I'd love to tell you that it was a lot more complicated than that, but it was really a matter of falling in love with the story and wanting to share it with other people.
Lately, Elizabeth George lives about a mile away from me, and I've been watching. She came into my workshop last year and explained her process to my group, and I started studying what she does, and I've kind of picked up her process now. I'm doing character sketches, I'm letting the characters build the plot finally, instead of, I've always plotted the story out first and then filled it with characters. Now I'm filling out the characters and I'm hoping the plot flows out of that. So it's kind of an experiment. After about 50 books, I'm doing it somewhat differently.
So I've got usually a good 3 or 4 hours every morning where I'm feeling creative, I'm feeling alive. And that's the magic part of the process. That's the mysterious part where I don't really understand what it is that makes me feel good about it, but by the end of that, when that period ends, I usually feel like I've gotten something done. That's the creative part. After that comes the work, the slogging, the turning the creative process into something that can be sold. So that involves editing, that involves plotting, that involves analyzing the characters, figuring out which ones have which roles in the story, which like, you know, if you have 2 characters serving the same purpose, there's a lot of analyzing that goes on. And so I do that with the less creative times, but it's still, you need your mind to be sharp. It's just a bit less magical.
The process of streamlining my process took years, and it's still going on. It never stops. It never stops. You start to, and it's different, tailored to the project. You know, how much research do you do? Where can you streamline the research? The first time you research something that requires some research, a good chunk of research, you tend to overread. You tend to go nuts, and you can get lost in the research process. And then the next time you have to do something that's research, you tend to be a little more selective in thinking of the finished product. So I think it happens over years. In each project you learn a little more about what your process is for getting it done efficiently and high quality at the same time.